Before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because today you're about to witness one of the most intense stories of action and revenge we've ever told here. It was an apparently ordinary morning at the forward operating base of the Special Forces. The sun rose over the desert, casting its golden heat across the aligned military vehicles, ready for another day of operations. But for Sergeant Mason Cole, a Marine with over 2 decades of classified missions, this day would be different. Intelligence reports indicated suspicious movements along the supply routes, but no one imagined that a group of terrorists was about to execute a bold and deadly plan. With surgical precision, they waited for the exact moment, and when Mason's convoy crossed the narrow pass between 2 cliffs, hell was unleashed. The silence of the desert was shattered by a series of deafening explosions. The first improvised mines obliterated the lead vehicle, blocking any escape. Then, gunfire erupted from all directions, while clouds of dust and smoke engulfed the convoy. Mason reacted on instinct, leaping from the vehicle, finding cover and coordinating return fire, even though they were outnumbered. But something was wrong. The attacks weren't random. Each shot, each blast, was calculated to isolate Mason from the rest of his unit. Within minutes, his men were dead or gravely wounded, and he found himself surrounded by masked fighters, armed to the teeth. The group's leader, with a cold, merciless stare, gave the order that would change everything. Take him alive. That's the man we want. Mason was disarmed with brutality, shackled, and thrown into the back of a truck covered with canvas. The engine roared, and at high speed they tore through nearly invisible trails across dunes and canyons. The suffocating heat and the stench of fuel mixed with the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. Through slits in the canvas, Mason caught glimpses of the barren horizon, but felt every curve, every jolt. They were headed somewhere remote, far from any chance of immediate rescue. The convoy finally stopped at an improvised fortress, hidden among giant rock formations. Concrete walls and barbed wire surrounded the compound. Armed guards patrolled the towers, and the group's black flag waved like a mortal warning. Mason knew this wasn't just a prison. It was a stage built to break even the strongest of men. Dragged inside, Mason heard whispers among the terrorists, not of hatred but of caution. Some even avoided saying his name. "Cole, the Demolisher," one of them muttered, almost reverently. His reputation preceded him. Secret missions in enemy territory, impossible rescues, operations that had shifted the course of wars. Among his enemies, Mason was known as the man who never failed. And that was precisely why the leader, Rashid al-Karim, had chosen him as a trophy. For them, capturing the deadliest Marine in the world wasn't just a victory, it was a message to anyone who dared oppose them. Mason, even in chains, held his cold, defiant gaze. He knew that his presence there didn't signify weakness, but the beginning of a personal war. Hours after the abduction, cameras were set up in the compound's courtyard. Mason was forced to kneel in front of a black banner as Rashid read a threatening statement in several languages. The recording would be sent to international broadcasters and obscure corners of the internet, announcing that the Deadliest Special Forces Marine was now in their hands. The demands were clear: the release of dozens of prisoners and millions of dollars, or Mason would be executed live. The video was edited with images of destruction, explosions, and battlefield carnage, crafted to instill fear. But when the camera focused on his face, Mason remained unshaken. No trembling, no pleas. Just a look that told everyone, especially his captors, that the true hunt had only just begun. Locked in a narrow cell, with stone walls and only a small slit of light from above, Mason began mapping every detail of his prison. The cold, damp floor, the distant sound of boots on patrol, the faint smell of gunpowder wafting from a nearby stockpile, everything was valuable information. Guards tried to break him with sleep deprivation, rationed water, and violent interrogations, but nothing shattered his discipline. With every blow he endured, he stood tall, staring his tormentors down with a silence that unnerved them more than any insult. Mason knew the honor of a soldier wasn't in surviving at any cost, but in never betraying his principles or his allies. And in that calculated silence, he prepared not just for his escape, but for the vengeance already burning inside him. Frustrated, Rashid ordered the tortures to intensify. Tighter shackles cut into Mason's wrists. Long hours suspended from the ceiling tore at his shoulders, and interrogations were punctuated with electric shocks. They wanted fear, begging for mercy, but all they got was a cold, calculating stare. Every provocation only fed Mason's survival instinct. He controlled his breathing, mastered the pain, and used each session to note patterns, guard rotations, blind spots in surveillance, the unease of younger soldiers. Even wounded, Mason turned suffering into strategy. He knew that to win, he would have to endure to the limit and then surpass it. For him, vengeance wasn't just payback. It would be a lesson no one would forget. On the third night, a nearly imperceptible mistake changed everything. A young guard bringing Mason water left the cell door slightly ajar for just a second before closing it. For any other prisoner, it would have gone unnoticed. But for a Marine like Mason, it was a message. Every system has a flaw. He began timing the exact moments of the patrols, the gap before the next shift. He also noticed that for a few minutes the East Tower was left unmanned, while guards rotated out for a smoke. It was a narrow window, but enough to act. Mason knew the first opportunity wasn't to escape. It was to understand the fortress from within, memorize routes, and prepare the fatal strike. The silent war had begun. For Mason, every mission followed a personal code, etched into his mind since the first days of training. Protect allies, eliminate threats, and never leave an attack unanswered. In the silence of his cell, he repeated that oath, turning it into fuel for the operation about to begin. He started communicating with other prisoners by tapping on the walls, using a rhythmic code learned in covert missions. Slowly, he gathered intelligence, approximate guard numbers, location of armories, supply delivery times. Each detail strengthened the plan. Mason knew it wasn't enough to escape. He had to destroy the base, cripple the enemy, and make sure they never regrouped. Above all, he had to send a clear message: abducting the world's deadliest Marine would come at an unbearable price. On the fifth day, Mason received an unexpected visitor, a local prisoner, a former soldier captured months earlier who knew every corridor of the fortress. His name was Karim, and though his body bore the marks of torture, his eyes still carried the fire of a fighter. At first, Mason was suspicious. Alliances in enemy territory could be traps. But Karim proved his worth by revealing a makeshift map of the compound carved into the wood of his bunk. He also told of a forgotten tunnel, used decades ago by smugglers, that might still be partially open. Karim wasn't seeking only his own freedom. He had personal scores to settle with Rashid and his men. Sealing their partnership, Mason felt the game shift. He was no longer alone. Together they would turn that prison into a battlefield. Under the cover of night, Mason and Karim put their plan into motion. Using a hidden shard of metal, they forced the lock at the exact moment the East Tower was left unguarded. Moving like shadows, they silently eliminated two guards with swift, precise strikes. Blood stained the stone floor, but there was no time for hesitation. Every second mattered. They reached the armory where Mason reclaimed the familiar weight of an assault rifle. With limited ammo and improvised explosives, they pressed toward the tunnel Karim had mentioned. But the escape wouldn't be clean. An alarm blared when a guard stumbled upon a body. In seconds, sirens screamed and the corridors filled with shouts and gunfire. The fortress now knew the deadliest Marine was loose and coming for them all. With alarms howling, Mason moved like a predator in his own territory. Every corner became an ambush, every doorway an opportunity to drop another enemy. Using improvised grenades, he created explosions to disorient the terrorists and block pursuit. Karim covered his flank, ensuring no one got behind them. Their path to the tunnel became a trail of destruction. Fallen guards, captured weapons, fear on the faces of those still resisting. Mason wasn't just escaping, he was sending a message. Every strike against him would be repaid with interest. In the command center, Rashid listened in horror over the radio, realizing his trophy had become the nightmare of his entire army. And Mason was only getting started. As they neared the tunnel, Mason and Karim saw Rashid's elite fighters already waiting. The narrow passage became a battlefield lit by muzzle flashes and explosions that echoed through the stone walls. Mason used every cover, firing with deadly precision, while Karim flanked to destabilize the enemy line. The terrorists shouted in desperation, unable to halt the advance of just 2 men. But Rashid hadn't given up. From a high platform, he watched the battle, waiting for the perfect moment to strike in person. For Mason, this wasn't just another fight. It was the reckoning he had waited for since day one of his captivity. And here, outnumbered and surrounded, he resolved that no enemy would leave the fortress alive. The gunfire stopped for a brief moment, like the breath before a storm. Rashid descended from the platform, wielding a curved blade that gleamed in the dim light. He wanted a direct fight, face to face. Mason dropped his rifle, drew his combat knife, and charged without hesitation. The clash of steel rang out through the tunnel, each blow carrying years of training and built-up rage. Rashid was fast and lethal, but Mason fought with something his enemy lacked: the determination to protect his honor and repay every ounce of pain inflicted on him. With a precise move, Mason disarmed Rashid, and in a final strike, drove the blade into the terrorist leader's chest. The silence that followed was heavy. Mason stood over the fallen body, breathing hard, knowing this battle was over. But the mission was not. With Rashid dead and the remaining guards fleeing in panic, Mason and Karim pushed through the tunnel until they emerged far into the desert. The cool night air felt lighter, but Mason knew freedom still demanded one last step, making sure the organization could never rise again. Using the explosives they had brought, he set off a series of timed detonations, reducing the fortress to rubble before dawn. The blasts lit up the horizon, a symbol that justice had been served. At the extraction point, they were met by a rescue team who listened in disbelief to how 2 men had taken down an entire army. Before boarding the helicopter, Mason cast one last look at the desert, certain that this battle was won, and leaving a reminder to all who watched: never, ever mess with the wrong man. And before we end, have you liked, shared, and subscribed yet? If not, do it now and help this story reach even further.